The Sandy and Toddcast is a MindgardenMedia podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. We're back with another Sandy and Toddcast, and we're still talking about history.
And last week a couple people contacted me and actually asked me if I had ever tried to contact, everybody knows my K2 stories, if I had ever tried to contact any of my family that way. And I said, well, stay tuned. So this week we're going to tell a little bit about my experience with that.
Perfect. Season 8, Episode 6. History is no mystery. It continues, and the Sandy and Toddcast is next.
I'm Vicki Hackbarth, owner of Chakra Awakening, LLC. I'm a certified Reiki master providing services which include past life karma clearing. Karma from your past lives affect you today. Karma is the memory of our souls, which often stem from prior lives. But we didn't finish then, we come back to finish now. Unpleasant situations are the consequence of lingering karma, which can be reversed and resolved. I can help you clear the past life karma carried over from former lifetimes. For more information, find me on Facebook at Chakra Awakening, LLC.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day. All while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
Welcome again to the Sandy and Toddcast. She is Sandy.
He is Todd.
And we're talking about history and how people and the events in their lives basically create, a history that a lot of times is lost. Unless somebody is famous or they've done something big, like in a city sometimes, like there'll be libraries that are named after people, or there'll be streets named after people. And then you go to the cemetery, like here in Oshkosh, and there are the same names on the big mausoleums and stuff. But right next to them is the small grave of, somebody who maybe died 100 years ago, 100 or 200 years ago, and the name's not familiar and the grave's a little worn out, and you don't know their story. Their name is not on the street signs. It's not on the library or anything like that. So I think what we're trying to do with this series is talk about how the history of investigating, at least for us, I think investigating has changed. It's not, and we've said this before, it's not so much about like the ooh-ah kind of thing. There's a little bit of that, but we really want to tell the story of the locations and the people who have been there, tell those stories in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and when you think about cemeteries, a lot of people get, creeped out by cemeteries. I find them beautiful. And I have always found them peaceful. I have never really been scared in a cemetery. A lot of people think that there's no way that they could be haunted, because why would you stay where you're buried if you're a quote unquote ghost? Why wouldn't you? And I sort of buy into that a little tiny bit, in that I don't think that there are spirits or energies there all the time. But if you asked me, especially in my experience now, the past almost year, I'm going to tell you that there are definitely people who come back to visit. And to tie it in with history, I feel like, I think we discussed this last week, I really feel like their marker, their gravestone is their piece of history. It's really what they have left in a lot of ways. And so who wouldn't be drawn to that, especially if someone is showing them attention, is acknowledging their life, their marker, their mark on their life right there in the cemetery. And so I just think that they can be beautiful things. And this weird journey that I've been taking that's turning into something that I never expected really started last September. when Dave and I and Spike were in Rochester, and I had that conversation with Susan B. Anthony, of all people. Kind of unexpected, wasn't really expecting anything, but thought I'd bring the K2 out of the car just for the heck of it because I carry it around. And had this
She has a holster on her belt. She has a holster. K2 on one side.
Gun, I put my K2.
Millimeter on the other side, and she hits the road.
But that really opened it up for me because I started to realize that maybe they want to talk to me, or some of them want to talk to me. Mm-hmm. And so I've been doing it a lot. And it's been a really, really interesting ride. You and I have had several discussions about the method and what would be the best way to handle it, and why we think we get certain answers, and why we think to questions, and why I don't get answers to certain questions and things like that. And still kind of learning and developing the quote unquote technique, but it's been so interesting, and I have to say really fulfilling to me, because I feel like I'm helping. I feel like I'm giving them a voice again that they may not have had in a very, very long time.
This became very evident to me. And as we continue with the season and we talk more and more, I think it's really important that the average person gets their story told, beyond their death day. And it became very evident to me, I'm going to say maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, where I lived growing up, and I'll keep this short, but it was my grandfather's farm. And so my grandfather and grandmother had their house there, obviously. And then there was acreage of farm. And at one point, somewhere down the road, my aunt and uncle bought a plot of the farm, and they had their house on the corner. And then my cousins, their child, built a house on a plot next to theirs. And then later down the road, my parents bought a plot just down the road from all those. So it was a family right on the corner of this country road. And it had always been, quote unquote, the Deering corner, basically. And so my grandmother and grandfather eventually have to move out and go to a home. Their house gets sold to somebody else. And they do a ton of renovations and stuff and fuck it up and whatever. And then my aunt and uncle pass away and are no longer in the corner. And then my cousins moved out. They no longer live there either. They moved out. I think they got a divorce or whatever. And then my mom dies and my dad dies. We have to sell the house. Well, my dad had to go to a home. But at any rate, so to me, these are still the Deering homes. And about 2 years ago, I was taking a drive. I actually think I went out to my mom's grave. And on the way out, I saw this younger couple with a little boy playing at my aunt and uncle's house. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to stop in. I'm just going to stop in and say, hey. And I did. And I introduced myself. I said, I'm from the family. My aunt and uncle lived here, blah, 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 blah. No idea who they were. People that now live in my grandmother and grandfather's house. No idea who they were.
Right.
Luckily, right now, the family that lives in my mom and dad's house, while they don't know my dad, they do know me and my sister. But the next sale of that house, it's gone. Everything my grandparents did on that farm, and there's great stories of that farm, but it's all going to be lost. The days and weeks and months that my father and his brothers and sister went out and picked stones and actually created these huge stone piles. Nobody's going to know that story. Nobody's going to know how hard our families worked to build these homes and have their families and all that. It's all going to be wiped away. And all that's left are their stones. So for me, my eye opening was, God, I mean, you really do. The minute you die, the memory of you and everything you ever did in life starts to go away. And then last week, a very good friend of my father passed away. And they were such good friends that after my father's funeral, we had lunch with him and his wife. And he was telling us great fucking stories that we never knew about my father because, you don't know your dad until you're born and you're old enough to remember him. And that's all you know of him. You don't know the stuff he pulled when he was younger.
No, and you don't think to ask those questions.
You don't. When you're younger. And I'm not sure. And I'm not sure if I said to my dad, hey, what kind of shit did you get into as a kid? I don't think he would tell me because my dad was very strict. If we would have done the shit my dad did, our asses would have been bleeding from getting
Usually
beat.
the most strict parents are the ones that were the craziest.
But at any rate, I want to move on. But the point is that there's got to be more than that, right?
It's ironic that you tell that story because literally, Todd, just yesterday, I was outside in the backyard with Spike and he was sniffing around and I looked back at my house and the thought came across my mind that when Dave and I are gone, someone else will have this house and will have no idea who the heck lived here before. And it's just been passed on. And that's so ironic you told that story.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, the older you get, I think the more you think about those things. And it's sad. It makes me happy to know, I guess, that somebody would have a great little home to start out their life with or, whatever. But our memories do fade. And case in point, the other night, Dave and I went to a cemetery that we had never been to before. I had known about it a few years. I found it by mistake on findagrave.com when I was doing research for something else. And it's only about 5 minutes from my house. And you go on this road and there's a town park down the road and there's a couple industrial businesses down the road. And here's this small plot of land with probably 20, 25 graves enclosed in a fence. Thankfully, someone cared enough to put up a fence. The graves there are not any older than probably 1840 or 1850. They're completely in ruin, broken in half. There's pieces stacked up against a tree. You have no idea where anyone truly is buried. And it just literally broke my heart. And Dave and I were discussing it as we were leaving. And I said, Dave, these probably two families, because there were only a couple of different names in there. These two families probably lived side by side, buried their dead family members in this place. As time went on, family would come and pay their respects. But then as time went on, there was no family left that would come and do that. And so it just fell into this disrepair that is so sad. Pieces of the land probably got divided up and sold and nobody cared. And it just makes me sad to know that these people are forgotten.
Yeah.
I don't know who these people are. I paid my respects. I'm not someone who's comfortable walking on the graves, and it made me very uncomfortable because I had no idea where anyone was buried in there. There were probably 3 graves that I could definitely say this is where the person is buried. And it just made me so incredibly sad for these people. And I used the K2 to see if anybody was willing to speak. And I did speak to a Revolutionary War veteran named Samuel Bailey, and his wife Ruth was there next to him. And I was very happy to see that there was a flag there, and there was also a Revolutionary War veterans memorial, sort of that stick thing that goes in there. I don't know what they call them, by his grave. And I had a conversation with him. And this was probably the first time he had someone try to communicate with him in 225 or so years. 225 or so years. And I understand that on the other side, time is not the same as time here.
Right.
But that is a lot of time that nobody really has cared enough to acknowledge these people and try to talk to them. And I think it's very personal, and I think it's very kind to offer the opportunity for them to communicate with us after all this time.
Yeah. And again, when you're talking about that and you're talking about families and at some point, the last ones from the area died off. And if there were any that scattered across the country, nobody comes back to look at gravestones and all that kind of stuff.
No. And I was able to trace Mr. Bailey's descendants a bit. And then all of a sudden it just kind of stopped. So I'm sort of at a dead end with that, no pun intended. But I was
going to say something, but inside my head said that would be tasteless. Don't say that.
I know. But it's just I look at the thing that I do You know what's funny? I thought of you the other night when I was doing this because we talk about on the Ghost Hunters show, Jason's daughter. What's her name? I always want to call her like, Satori. I always want to call her Sanctuary. I don't know why.
Let's name our daughter Sanctuary. Oh, it's lovely.
She and her boyfriend do this thing where they sort of create like a little mini circuit, a mini seance, and they hold hands and they ask for knocks to communicate with them. And I almost feel like this is sort of my little form of communication. I don't know why it works so well. I don't know how it works so well. I don't know if it's because I am open and sensitive. I just don't know. But I know that it works. And so in the end, if this makes them feel remembered and noticed, and it makes me feel good about it, I think it's a really good thing to do. Really good thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk real quick. We'll talk about, it's been like a month now, I think. We'll talk real quick about my trip to Pennsylvania last month. Dave and I took Spike. We went down for a few days to the Wilkes-Barre Scranton area of Pennsylvania. And not just to visit, my ancestors, but also to visit my living family, because we have some living family, our nieces and nephew, who live down in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So everybody kind of congregated together on that Saturday in Scranton, and we all hung out for the day, which was really nice because we hadn't seen them in several years, especially because of the pandemic. But I have some ancestors in my family, the Slocum family, who are very, very well known, especially down in that area, but some of them are actually well known around the country. Back in the 1770s, my seventh generation ancestor, Jonathan Slocum, and his wife Ruth, had a little 5-year-old girl named Frances Slocum, who was captured by the Native Americans, and I am making the story very short, captured by the Native Americans, taken to live with them, and essentially grew up with them for 60 years. And when she was found that many years later, did not want to leave her family and her friends in her village. She ended up in, I think it was Indiana, passing away in Indiana. And she had 2 daughters, and she had a couple of sons that were stillborn. But there have been books, there are parks named after Frances, both in Indiana, cemeteries named after her, memorials, books, movies, you name it, has been written. She's very, very well known. Her father was killed by the Native Americans during the Battle of Wyoming, Pennsylvania, which we did actually go and visit that memorial as well, the place where this massacre took place. One of his sons actually escaped from it and lived. And so I have just been fascinated by this whole portion of my family history, and I have been diligently researching my family history on my grandmother's side, the Slocum side, for many, many months now. So it was really important to me to get down there and be able to see where some of this stuff took place. At one point when Frances was taken that evening, they took her to this one area in the woods by a lake, a stream, and it was sort of like an overhang of a rock. And this is a funny story, and you laughed at me already about this, but yes. She did escape from them there, and they caught her and brought her back, but they spent the night there. And so it was a beautiful weekend. It was probably about 77, 78 degrees. And I had it in my head that we were going to go to Frances Slocum State Park, and we were going to go on the trail that had this rock overhang, like a ledge. And it's very well known. There's even a sign there about it. And we were going, because I wanted to go take pictures with it. And it was a loop trail, and it was 0.7 miles. Well, let's just take into account the fact that I'm fat, that I'm old, that I didn't even wear sneakers. I wore like my sandals because I didn't think it was going to be a hill. I, for some reason, thought we were just walking a trail. I didn't think anything of it. So we walk up this thing. It was hot. I was dying. Poor Spike. Dave forgot his water in the car. I'm worried about Spike having heat exhaustion. We get all the way to the top of this like mountain hill thing, and we start coming down, and there's this couple there, and they're resting too, and we walk by them. I'm dying, and we finally see this ledge. And Todd, this ledge was 0.1 miles from where we started. All we had to do was veer to the right instead of the left on the trail, and we would have missed the whole trail and just gone to the rock ledge. I had no idea. But I did get to see it. I couldn't breathe well enough to get out my K2, but the couple was there too, and I didn't want them to think I was really crazy, just dying. So I did take a couple pictures of the rock ledge. I thought that was neat, and I did get to see that. So after Spike and I recovered from that, of course, I said to Dave on the trail, I'm like, Dave, aren't you like out of breath? He says, no, I'm fine. I was like, I'm going to kill you. So we did get to do that, though, which I am very grateful. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I could quit now, but I said, no, I'm not going to quit. This is something I need to do. This is something I want to do. I'll suffer. I'll be fine. I'm going to get through this. And I did. So I made myself do it. And I'm very proud of myself for doing it, because now I got to do something that was really personal and meaningful to me.
And
so,
how did you feel afterward? I mean, truly.
I felt great. Once I recovered.
No, I'm talking about the recovery. Like, how was that?
I did okay. Once we set, because like 3/4 of it was uphill, but the rest of it was downhill. So I was kind of recovering as we were going down the hill, but then that couple was there, so we couldn't really stop long. And I wanted to take some time to really sit there on the ledge and really almost meditate, and feel what I could feel, but I couldn't do that. So at least now I know that if we ever go down in that area again and we stop there, I know exactly where I'm going and what I'm doing. And so maybe we'll go in the fall instead of the warm weather.
Yeah.
And, but I was okay. I was all right. I mean, when you're fat and old, that's what happens. And I'm prepared. So anyway, so that was good though. I was really glad we did that. And, the last thing we wanted to do on that Friday was this is the meat of the story. We wanted to go to the Hollenbeck Cemetery in Wilkes-Barre. That is where all of my ancestors are buried. And I was so excited to do this. I had the Melmeter, I had the digital recorder, I had the K2 meter. I was so excited to do it. The problem was that the cemetery, we got there at like 5:00 and the cemetery was closed. The cemetery itself was open, but the office was closed, and they do not have any kind of real signage in the cemetery to tell you. I knew the plot numbers or the lot number, but I didn't know where any of the lots were. And this cemetery, Todd, is huge. So we go in and we go around this we go up the hill and then we go down the hill and we go around this one corner. And I love the mausoleums. Mausoleums call to me. I love them. I love the idea of the family energy in one place. And especially when we were in Chicago a couple years ago, and we went to, now of course I can't think of the name of it. Graceland Cemetery. I had to look at my book. Graceland Cemetery, and they had a whole row of beautiful mausoleums, and I love it when they're open so that they're, you can see into them. I think it's easier to pay respects that way because it's more personal. And I just am drawn to mausoleums. So there's like a row of mausoleums. We're in the car, beautiful day, and there's this one mausoleum that I just suddenly feel drawn to. And I've learned over the years now to go with my gut feelings. So I said, Dave, stop the car. And I also noticed, too, that there were these, like, on some of them, there were, like, these little cloth bags hanging from them.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. It sort of reminded me of when I discovered geocaching a few years ago, and I was terrified. I thought it was like some kind of witchcraft in the cemetery.
Right.
And remember that? And I was like, who's leaving these little white cloth bags on here? And I was torn between opening them and looking and being disrespectful. I didn't know what it was. So I didn't look at it. And I said, let me get out for a second. So I took the K2 and I went up and it just started going off. And I said, oh, and let me preface this story and every other story I tell you that I did actually do a little bit of investigating, a little bit of research into any power lines that might be in a cemetery, anything with electricity that might be in a cemetery. The general consensus of things that I've learned is that if there are power lines buried in a cemetery, they're usually buried under the road.
Okay.
So
like where you drive?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they wouldn't be, if you walk in, 20 feet, you're not really going to consistently catch stray EMF.
Gotcha.
Because there's no electricity in vaults. There's no electricity in the regular grave, and this is just the general consensus of what I've researched. So anyways, back to the story. I start getting it's going off, and I'm naming some of the names of the people. I have no idea who these people are, like absolutely no idea. And one of the names happened to be Florence Foster Jenkins, and you can see into the mausoleum, so you can see their names right in the crypt. And this woman seemed to be responding to me. No clue as to who she was. Nothing. And so I asked her if she was aware that there was something hanging from the thing, and it indicated yes. I mean, pretty strong hits. Timely hits that seem to be intelligent and according to what I'm asking. So I had to go because I really wanted to look for my family as well. So I said, would it be okay if I come back tomorrow and talk to you some more? And she said, yes. So I was like, okay. So I left, still didn't look in the bag, left, and we drove everywhere in the cemetery, could not find my family. I had pictures of the graves, but it's like a needle in a haystack.
Sure.
There's just no way. No way. So we decided that we were going to come back the next morning before the family got there to us in Scranton, and we were going to ask the office if they could direct us. Well, as I got home that night to the Airbnb, I realized that it was Saturday. The office is closed. Now what do I do? Here's a great tip for people who use Find a Grave. If you find a grave that you can't locate, it will tell you who took the picture for
Correct.
Find a Grave
Yep.
and submitted it. And if you click on that, you can email those people. So I emailed the lady who took the pictures of my family's graves. And she got back to me right away and told me exactly how to find them. Exactly. Because we literally wandered for like an hour. I mean, it was wonderful because we got to see all these amazing stones and monuments and all these great things. But we were tired. It was a long day. It was almost 3 hours down. We'd been going nonstop. We would just want to get back and eat and get into the Airbnb. So it was really helpful. So the next morning we get up and we go back. And we had some flowers. I always bring flowers whenever possible. If I go back to revisit people, I bring flowers then. I had these beautiful, gorgeous, I don't even know what they looked, almost like lilies. I don't know what they were. They were gorgeous. Dave got 2 bunches of them, so I had plenty. So we found my family in literally 3 seconds. We must have gone by there like 15 times
Right.
the day before. And it was interesting. I didn't get a ton of activity with the K2 until I asked if Ruth was there. Now, Jonathan was buried there. So was Ruth. They're seventh generation ancestors for me, direct ancestors. And also plenty of other family members there. They're actually in two separate areas, not far from each other, but two separate areas. Didn't get a lot of activity until I asked if Ruth was there, and did get activity and answers to my questions. So Ruth passed in, I think it was the 1820s. She was born in probably the 1840s. I can't off the top of my head remember, but did get some great answers, some great responses. Didn't last too long. Again, begs the question about strength, about, interest. I'm not sure. I did mention that I am a descendant. That seemed to spark some interest in the conversation, but didn't last long. No way of knowing for sure. That's a good question. How long does it take once they expel that energy to answer a question? How long does it take them to do it again? Are there different levels of energy depending on how active they are, or, anything? Who knows? So had a really wonderful conversation. I've been taking videos of these conversations that I have as I go along, because I think it's important to document them and to learn from them. So in other words, not just speaking to Ruth Tripp Slocum, whose father, by the way, was one of the pioneers in Wilkes-Barre and Scranton, one of the earliest settlers there, too. So her side of the family was very well known down there as well. They were Quakers, my family originally came from Scotland, England, Wales. I could trace them back to about the 1400s, which I thought was pretty cool. But the Quakers, unfortunately, kind of believed in the fact that they believed in peace, and they had a good relationship with the Native Americans at the time, and trusted that that meant that they would be safe. And obviously they were not safe.
Right.
It was a crazy, crazy time back then. It was just really, there's just so much going on in the country at that point in time. They were originally from Rhode Island. So really interesting story as far as contacting my ancestors. I do believe I spoke with Ruth.
That's so
however,
cool.
It wasn't that. I just love it. I just love the fact that I was able to speak with someone 7 generations my ancestor and make that connection, however short it might have been. So after we left them, we went back to the Foster Mausoleum, and I really wanted to speak with Florence because I had done some research about Florence the night before. And so I was ready. I knew what I wanted to talk about. Florence was a character. Now, it's important to note that the Foster Mausoleum is a stop on many of the history walks that they do in the cemetery. So the Fosters get plenty of attention.
Yeah.
And are known in the community. So that keep that in mind, because that may make a difference in the amount of conversation that I had. Not that the Slocums aren't, because the Slocum family is actually a stop on the history trail as tours as well in there. But that's also a much older family than the Foster family. So just a really quick little blurb about Florence, because she was quite the character. She was Florence Foster Jenkins. She was born Narcissa Florence Foster, July 19th, 1868. And she was an American socialite, amateur soprano, and she became known and mocked for her flamboyant performance costumes and notably poor singing ability. She was ranked as the world's worst opera singer. No one before or since has succeeded in liberating themselves quite so completely from the shackles of musical notation. That's a quote from Stephen Pyle, who I'm assuming was someone at the time who was sort of like the critic. She was a character, and people aren't sure whether she realized that she was being mocked, or if so, did she just enjoy the attention and go with it and have that kind of a personality that she loved it? Or was she completely unaware of it? And in her own mind, she was great. Amazing.
Right.
Yes. The jury is still out on that to this day. So now, despite or perhaps because of her technical incompetence, she became a prominent musical cult figure in New York City during the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. Some of her fans were Cole Porter, Giancarlo Menotti, Sir Thomas Beecham. Many other celebrities were counted among her fans. Yes, even Enrico Caruso reportedly regarded her with affection and respect. And again, it may just be they loved her because she had balls, because she was out there doing what she loved. I actually was able, as a side note, guys, was able to dig up, and I'll have to share it in the group. I was able to dig up a video of her singing towards the end of her life. This woman sold out Carnegie Hall 1 week before she passed away.
Wow.
It was such a huge accomplishment for this woman. And she passed November 26, 1944. It was just about a week after she sold out Carnegie Hall. I think it was heart problems. She had some health problems. She had been married twice. And so I came in armed with information. And I thought about it, and I thought the best way for me to elicit a better conversation with her would be to show my reverence to her.
Right.
For selling out Carnegie Hall and how amazing she was. And
play to her ego a little bit.
Stoke the ego, get her all happy and stuff. And boy, did it work. This is probably one of my proudest and happiest communications with someone who's passed on, because you could tell she just wanted to talk to me. Once she realized that I knew about her and that I was there to talk to her, she was talking to me. She loved that I brought her a flower. I took the flower. It was a long, long stem, and I literally kind of crosswayed it in the door. And I asked her if she liked the flower, and she big yes. And she just was that talking to me, and intelligent responses. And, that's one of the important things to remember is that 99% of the time, it's not constant EMF. If it was constant EMF, I'd be looking more for explanations as to why it was constant EMF,
right.
Not the, ones that are answering me after a question, or not answering me after a question for that matter, the intelligent responses. And we had probably one of the most beautiful conversations. And I asked her if she was happy that she sold out Carnegie Hall. And I told her that I looked up to her, and she was just so happy to have someone willing to communicate with her and not just talk about her standing in front of the mausoleum, but actually acknowledging her. I think that was the difference in the story, Todd. I think it was that they're being remembered on the walks, on the tours, but they're not being addressed on the tours. And I think that sometimes that may make the difference.
Yeah.
For them. And so she was just absolutely lovely to talk to. And I could have been there all day talking to this woman. I don't think she would have gone. I think she would have stayed and talked to me. But I did have a dog and a husband in the car. So I did, bid my farewells and asked her if it was okay if I came and visited her again sometime.
Hashtag poor Dave. Hashtag poor Spike.
But, he doesn't care. He's just happy to be in the car. He loves it. Both of them. And so.
Okay, Dave.
But it was really, really a wonderful experience. That trip was fantastic. And I got to see my nieces, their husbands. I got to see my great nieces and great nephews. 3 of them we were meeting for the first time that weekend because they were young and we hadn't seen them in years. So It was just really, really nice to be able to spend time with family, both departed and living, and kind of tie it all into one weekend. It was just fantastic. And I get a little emotional about it because I think that if you do have family, whether they're gone or they're still here, that if possible, and it's not always possible for a lot of reasons, but if it's possible, you should make the most of it whenever you can. So very, very interesting weekend. I would say that anyone who'd like to try it, I think it might work for you. I don't know if it will work for you, but if you go into it with an open mind and an open heart and you ask with respect and honor, then I think that it's possible that it could work for you.
Cool. Great story. I love that story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that's another episode here of the Sandy and Toddcast. We'll do our spiel and then we'll come back and talk about what's still ahead in this season. Stand by.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called the Empathecary Podcast. It's for empaths, by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. MindgardenMedia is their latest project where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing, and consulting is what they do. Like MindgardenMedia on Facebook or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
So we've only got 2 more episodes in this season.
Yep.
And then we'll be wrapping it up. And we're already thinking about what's going to happen with season 9 and where we want to go with the podcast and some other stuff we might want to do. So stick around for that. But we still got a couple of episodes here.
Yeah, I think because next weekend's the big holiday, we'll take next weekend off. We'll be back the week after with episode 7, which I have no idea what we want to talk about yet. We'll figure that out.
Right.
And probably 8 will be a little wrap up, a mishmash of everything. Maybe our thoughts about a little bit more of the communication aspect of it and how we can best remember people.
It's a great idea.
What are some of the best ways to do that? So just 2 more. If anybody has any ideas what they'd like to see in a season, we are always open to your suggestions. And like you said, have a couple of kind of cool ideas coming up the pipe.
You got it. All right. So until next time, bye.
Bye.